King in the North was the title given to the ruler of the North during its time as an independent kingdom. As such, House Stark ruled as kings in the North for thousands of years. Although the title was retired following the War of Conquest, a king in the North was once more crowned during the War of the Five Kings. Over the course of Westeros' history, there have been a total of 7 kings in the North, so let's take a look at each one. Before we look at each of the 7 kings in the North, let's take a look at the title's history and what power came with it. The title of King in the North was created before written history even began. By the time the Andaz invaded Westeros, the Stark kings in the North were already ruling Winterfell. They successfully repelled the invading Andaz by holding the line of the neck at the choke point of Moat Cailin. As a result, the North remained the only independent kingdom of the First Men. Due to Winterfell's close proximity to the Wall, the kings in the North not only sent men to join the Night's Watch, but they policed the organisation when needed. Honouring their duty, they executed deserters, intervened in disputes between commanders, and even dealt with threats that managed to slip past the Wall. By the time the King in the North had gathered his armies to challenge the Targaryen invaders during the War of Conquest, Aegon the Conqueror had already won the decisive field of fire and conquered most of southern Westeros. Seeing that the war had already been lost, and knowing that the northern armies had no hope of driving back Aegon and his dragons, the King in the North bent the knee, even if it earned him the derogatory nickname, the King Who Knelt. However, the action allowed the Starks to continue their rule of the North, while he ultimately served the Iron Throne. Holding titles such as Lord Paramount of the North, Lord of Winterfell, and Warden of the North, the Starks retained their ancient traditions, including their duties policing the Night's Watch. However, 300 years later, House Stark rallied behind Robert Baratheon to overthrow the Targaryen dynasty. Although Robert wound up on the Iron Throne in place of the Mad King Aerys II Targaryen, the Starks suffered the most from the conflict, losing Lyanna, Rickard, and Brandon Stark. Although the Starks rarely attended court in King's Landing, the house continued to faithfully serve the crown as close friends of King Robert. However, after 3 centuries, the title of King in the North returned during the War of the Five Kings. So now that we know all about the title of King in the North, let's take a look chronologically at every northern ruler. Legendary hero of the First Men, Bran the Builder, not only led forces of the North in the War for the Dawn against the White Walkers and constructed the Wall and Winterfell, but he created the title of King in the North, proclaiming himself as the first. King Brandon Stark followed during the Age of Heroes and allied with King Beyond the Wall Joramun to defeat the Night's King and the Night's Queen, freeing the Night's Watch from their rule. Next up was King Doran Stark, who ruled before the Targaryen conquest. Roderick Stark succeeded as King in the North and granted House Mormont lordship over Bear Island after he won it in a wrestling match. King Torrhen Stark was the King Who Knelt, making him the last of the independent kings in the North and the first Warden of the North. Around 300 years later, during the opening stages of the War of the Five Kings, Robb Stark was proclaimed as the King of the North by his bannermen. This followed the execution of his father Eddard Stark by King Robert's successor, Joffrey Baratheon. The youngster brashly intended to shock the North into submission by the axe. However, instead, the Northern Lords declared that they would never submit to Joffrey, no matter the odds against them. Although Robb never lost a battle, his reign was short-lived. After breaking his oath to marry a daughter of House Frey, he was betrayed at the Red Wedding and stabbed by Lord Roose Bolton. Afterwards, the title of King of the North was once more abolished, the North again fell under the rule of the Iron Throne, and House Bolton succeeded the Stark's power. However, former member of the Night's Watch Jon Snow avenged his brother's death. He led a mixed northern army in liberating Winterfell and ending House Bolton's reign over the North. Afterwards, the White Wolf was proclaimed as King of the North, becoming the final man to hold the title. Now it's time for this week's question. Who do you think the greatest King of the North was, or could be if you want to include Jon Snow? Let me know in the comments below. Today's video was suggested by a commenter in the previous episode, so make sure you tell me what you'd like to see next. However, next week's episode will be the final of the series, so I will try my best to make it longer than usual, and of course, I'll make it more sparkly and stuff. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and for more lore content including Game of Thrones, keep it locked here to the King's Stand. Sailing across the narrow sea, the Andaz began their massive migration to Westeros by invading the Vale. From there, they conquered most of the continent. However, they were repelled by the north, which was partly due to the fact the narrow lands of the neck that separated the north from the rest of the continent were ideal strategic choke points.